All right, welcome to part one of this series, how to create your master track for an RTS system of your own. How it works, what you need to keep in mind. There's a lot to talk about. I'll try to stay focused and keep things as simple as possible. Main thing to understand is that you'll be using Remedy to play your master track. You'll create it in your DAW, and it will start on whatever measure that your keyboard is set up. Like, as an example, mine is 76 long or big keyboard, 76 keys. So MIDI is going to map all these MIDI notes starting at measure 29. For whatever reason, I don't know, but that's how it does it. And you can find out what your keyboard size, where it starts, where to start in your DAW. So let me just get that graphic back. So I know in a 61 note keyboard, somebody had stated that theirs starts at 36, measure 36 in their DAW. Then you build it from there. I imagine an 88 keyboard probably would be starting at maybe measure 18, and maybe a 49 note keyboard might start, if you follow this little pattern here, maybe start at, measure 42 or something like that. But there's a way to quickly identify. You literally just, create a MIDI file, which we're going to do here, and then you import it into Remedy, and it will play it out on your keyboard, and you'll find out where your first notes are. And then you'll know, oh, my first notes are way in the middle of the keyboard. I want to be able to use the entire keyboard, so I want my first notes to be way on the left, preferably my first note on the left. That's the basic idea of that. And then you can map any musical idea on up to, I think Remedy can map and bind like 120 notes at a time. I've tested up to about 100 notes. So you simply can map out all the notes of a huge keyboard. If you have a small keyboard, to access all those mappings and possibilities, you would use your octave shift on a smaller keyboard to scroll you over from C1 to C7 and back and forth, wherever you want to play that musical idea that you have all mapped out on your keyboard. I think that's pretty easy to understand. I've got a setup here which is created for a new user to understand better, and for myself, because this stuff gets complex quick. But you have to keep in mind, this system, this RTS system, remaps your entire keyboard, so it's never going to play like a piano, because you're going to save this entire system to a project file. And when you use Remedy to play it, your entire keyboard will not act like a piano. You're not going to play a note at C3 and get a C3. It will play whatever's mapped. I think that's obvious. So, but because that's the case, anybody that sits down to your RTS and who doesn't know what's going on has no reference of what's what. So, and even yourself, even if you create it, you might forget that, C3 is going to be all C7 ideas. All your diminished chords are going to be in the black keys at C2. You need some reference, so you could either mark it down with some masking tape on your keyboard, little identifiers showing where your C major ideas are and your diminished or whatever, or just keep it in mind as you build it. I like this situation because I can say to anybody, well, you see here, your C major scale is all the 7 white keys on this octave, and that's your home base. You can experiment away from that as you feel comfortable. You can start borrowing chords from other modified scales around it, or just go back to your tonic and the very comfortable and surefire way of getting some easy melodies or progressions by using your tonic, going to your F, your G, which some people would say going from your first to your fifth, maybe to your fourth, back to the tonic, and then maybe borrow a chord. So, but in your mind, when you create these custom layouts, you want it so that you know where you're at, so you're not confused. So you're making your own custom layout according to how you want it. So it doesn't get much better than that. You decide where the music idea, what the music idea is. Maybe it's a theme of drama, maybe it's a theme of romance, or just who knows what, movie music. It's totally up to you. That's why the RTS system is made to be completely open-ended. It's whatever you create it to be. And but you can, having said that, you can keep things very simple and basic too. You could just say, I want just my major scales on this side of the keyboard, on this side all minor scales, and that's good for me. But more than likely you'll want to get more and more complex, and you can do that with potentially 120 or 100 different notes to map out. The potential to start playing and experimenting as you go is immense, because you'll start off with the tonic, and you'll find, oh, that combination works really good, that works good, and you're writing your own progression as you go, and then you'll hit a experimental note that maybe you don't know kind of what a C augmented or an augmented chord kind of does, or diminished. Maybe you're not there yet, but then you'll want to discover, what's their role in music. And then, but you'll easily just play notes and come up with progressions that work really well, and assign them to different instruments. And those instruments will be playing their own patterns and different sustained chords. And you might decide to hold down your chord for 2 beats and then move to another, chord. Experiment, or hold down your chord for, you could hold it down for 16 beats, always getting something new and fresh as sustained notes come and go, and different patterns and ostinatos play in there. It's just an open, type of sketching. But that's what you want to keep in mind, is your basic layout of your master track, because later on, everything, all the variations of this C triad major, meaning all the different inversions and dyads and parallel fifth combinations of these chords, and all the type of different voicings you can have for those initial triad chords. You can end up chords that are open and 5, 6, 7 notes deep, and they're inverted, and you'll have all those on layers underneath your C. This is just the basic music idea. So don't think that you're going to be limited to a C triad major in this. No, you'll have track layer after layer that you can change. You can have your main instrument strings. Maybe you want them to play a C major or an inverted C scale, but you may want your flutes to be mapped differently to an inverted C with a drop 2, so that you're playing maybe lower woodwinds. You're not limited by just the C major triad. That's the point I'm trying to make now. All right, let's put this graphic away for now. And let's stay on focus for this first video, because this could easily go on for 2 hours. In fact, I'm sure I'll be doing several just on the master track. But all right, so now we can say that in our DAW, we want to start, in this case, at measure 29. We have an arranger track that gives us color code so that we know where our octaves are. But like I said, you may not want to color code things to an octave or to a scale. You may have a very unique idea of music and different types of scales, and it doesn't even have to be it can be any scales, like that's the point I'm making. But this is what I'm using. And then your chord track. Chord track, very important. I think most DAWs have a chord track now. And then you just want a remedy open to start with. So let's just open it up. Go into remedy, and if it's brand new, you'll have your internal sound turned on. You want it turned off because you don't want to hear that internal sound. one of the best things about Remedy is it has no internal sounds, which means it's not going to drag down your CPU. You want an empty shell. You can create a folder and call it 2025 RTS ideas or whatever. You don't want to use any of the MIDI built into Remedy right now. You can just, keep that folder separate, make a new folder, and keep all your RTS ideas in there. And then you just simply, select a square. Usually you're only going to need one square, but you have many options. I think there's up to 120 if you open up all the, and go scroll down both ways. There's actually a lot of possibilities that Remedy can hold, a lot of different patterns and ideas in all these squares. But for our system, you really only need one square right now, and that one square will have many tracks in it. So make your own Remedy folder, start new, have an empty, turn off its internal sound, just start blank, rename it something like Remedy chords, or your basic first, you could call it Remedy master track for now. And really that's all we need to start to set up our idea. So we can move this, or just move this out of the way for a minute. Now, where are you going to get your theme ideas from? It seems only logical. You would use something like Scalar, or you could use Rapid Composer, or all the different scale or chord progression software. Tons to choose from. Many of us believe that Scalar is the go-to because it's such a neat interface and it's so easy to use. So in this case, we could pick anything from epic to horror to conclusive to classical to cinematic. The obvious choice here would be to just pick the cinematic chords. I'm not sure what's all in here. There may be some chords that 4 or 5 different notes in there. But for the sake of keeping this demonstration as simple as possible, we're going to just go to scales, pick C, and go C major. Just to keep it as simple as possible, because by default it's technical enough. So you would just grab some chords. We want them to be triads. That's why I went to the C major scale. I know these are all just simple triads. You can go to your DAW. We know that you can drag them in, and they should, if I zoom in, that should be 1 chord per measure. That's what we got. That's what we want. And that's all we need from Scalar right now. We can open this up a little bit more, and we have our first progression idea. Again, very basic, but believe me, we want to keep things as simple as possible to start. So right now, because I think I've showed in videos before, you can easily just go inside your DAW. We'll have something where you could just say chord track, create chord symbols. I have it on a hotkey. Hit that, make sure it's selected first, and then I just have these basic things set here. And then instantly you have that chord progression on your chord track now, and we're going to use that. It's going to come in handy if I double click, go to the editor, and because I always have it set up to chord track to make sure that all our notes are in the perfect harmony of the chord note and the scale. They're all green. That's where we want to be right now. You might be saying, well, are all your notes going to be green? How about all the harmonies and, moving, getting some dissonance in there, you don't always want perfect harmony, And that, of course, is the case, and that's what we're after, very complex and interesting chords and progressions. But for this system, it works best when the root and master track, everything on the master track is green, and we decide when we want to bring in any kind of harmonic ideas. And it's kind of like, well, everything's in harmony until we want to take it out of harmony on purpose. And we get to decide for every instrument, every phrase and every note of the chord. We decide what type of voice leading we've got, what type of voicing, inversions, whatever, like I've stated. It's all under your control. So we start with a bass that's all green or all perfect in harmony, so to speak. So this would be the first chord of our bigger setup here. So like I say, on my 76 note keyboard, we've got plenty of room to have all kinds of scales and ideas, but that's where we're at right now. All right, so what we're going to do next is simply explain that if we take all these chords that we've decided to use, we could instantly bring them into Remedy. But the way you need to do that is if you want a certain measure to be played on a certain note on your keyboard, in this case, you would, again, let's zoom right out. The way Remedy needs that file, even though we only have one scale and one octave done completed here, you would drag this out, and that's why you want to have your measure and your loop all set up with your arrange track so that this just becomes second nature. So you would save your DAW file now as something like RTS1. So this is all set up. So this particular project is just made for making RTS MIDI ideas. So now, because it's dragged out and the MIDI starting on measure 29, if I was to, and you can just select this and drag it into a square of remidi, and you will see the name of that MIDI I just created, populates that. And if you hit the wrench with your mouse and click, it activates that. Now this scale, these chords, these triads that play for one measure each, are now on track number 1. And you can have many tracks in here. You could have 50 tracks of different types of inversions of that. Whatever we want can all be dragged in as one master file just for chords if we want, into any block here. And then this and all these different variations of these chords, this remidi can be used for any instrument. So every instrument gets its own player, and that player can have 50 tracks of whatever idea you want. And it can also move it and shift it in time, change its tempo, which means you can have those chords play over 4 beats, or you can have them sustain over 16 beats. And so very powerful with the tempo in here. Depending on what articulation you're using per instrument, you can shift it against other tracks to get polyrhythms and counter rhythms, counter melodies. We don't use the loop. We don't use the size, keep it on 4. We don't use the bank number. You can freeze something, I'll talk about that later. You can transpose on the fly. So these are some of the basic things that you can do to this MIDI on whatever track you have selected. Then you can clear. So in this first video, this is just to show you the basic way you would set up your main theme for your initial idea. You build it little bits at a time as the videos come out and you learn how this works. You might have to do some adjusting because your keyboard might be 49, it might be 61, it might be 88. But I think you're getting the idea. And then we'll start to build multiple tracks, and then we'll see how, changing the tracks, and there's just a ton of stuff to go through. But it starts getting exciting knowing that we're not just using the C triads, we're using every possible variation, which gives you so much possibility just in your chords. But then when we get into ostinatos and patterns for short notes and for melodies, one of the really powerful things that I want to just show here is that if you create that pattern, say there's a 16 note pattern here in 16ths, so we would set our grid to say 16ths, and we see down here, if we zoom in a little bit better, you don't have to have the same pattern just changing by the chord. One of the secrets, or maybe not so well understood things about an RTS system, is every pattern, I like to have at least 6 or 7 or 8 different versions of that pattern that is played by any one note on your keyboard, so that it doesn't just change by your root chord. The pattern itself changes, and then what you do with that pattern also changes, and then you get such a huge variety happening because you're doing this with multiple instruments. So if you hold down your chord for 1 beat, you get one thing. If you decide to hold it for 2 beats and then switch to a different chord, you get something different. If you hold down for all 16 beats, you just hear different things happening without even changing a chord, right? So yeah, that's one of the things that's very powerful, and we'll get into that in the next video. Thanks for watching. Hope you're able to make some music today. We'll see you on the next video.